Dr. Sheikh Walid Rasool. Dr. Walid Rasool is from Shupia, the Apple town in the Indian occupied valley of Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Walid Rasool is an academician. He's a scholar and a practitioner. He's also a journalist with a specialization in positive peace and conflict resolution. He has been representing Kashmir's case worldwide, both through his writings, his journalistic at US Congress, to the House of Lords, to the SAARC countries, to the UAE, Turkey, Malaysia, Italy, and many other world capitals that he is. He's also part of the Pugwash, a Nobel Peace Prize winning organization, and has been working on track to moderation facilities as well. Dr. Rasool is a PhD from the Islamic, and he has also been a visiting faculty at the Rifa International University, Islamabad, and he has to his credit a book titled Kashmir Regional International Dimensions. Dr. Walid Rasool, you have the space, and I would appreciate if you could kindly stick to the 15 minutes time limit. Thank you so much. Kindly unmute yourself. Walid, you need to unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. The Quranic work is Lam Yahmiluhu Suma Yahmiluhu Asfara. मेरी बात ऐसी गद्दी की है जिसपे इल्म लादा गया है. But I have not learned it yet. I am just a student. So I am really delighted that there are the credible academicians from the Quaid-i-Azam University and Turkey. I'm just a student in this field, and my subject is beyond this ultra-nationalism, and I have given it name of Moditwa or the Modiism in our region, which is interplay of globalization and the media. In media, we say agenda setting because I have my multidisciplinary career from media to conflict science to international relations. So it is an interplay of racism, religion, caste, creed, and now India has brought science in play also, and it is a dangerous phenomena in our South Asian region, particularly in India-Pakistan context. And I am recently developing a paper in which I am studying the post-election results when BJP came in the power in the India, and which started from 2004, 2008, 2013, and 2019. And if we will study the continuous, the trend, what is, and it adds one more dimension in international relations on, that is the interplay of conventional, sub-conventional, and unconventional warfare in the hybrid situations. And what is more dangerous in the security paradigm is that they develop a narrative and won the elections. And now India and Moditwa is working on the three fronts simultaneously. She developed and she is dealing something differently with the middle class Hinduism and also the business class Hindu. And if we will study it thoroughly and deeply, it gives a new dangerous phenomena in our region. And when they developed a narrative that, as per agenda setting at the media, that it is not the media what to say, but what to say about Guske Marna. And that won the elections of the India. And entire focus and investment was done on the media to tag its neighbors with the terrorism in some circles, and then develop a constituency and win the elections. And when there is an interplay of the politics and you have the soul carries the nationalism and the Muditwa. Actually, when we study the Indian context in our region, the Indian philosophy to deal with her neighbors and also the uh, 220 million Muslims within the India, she solely focuses on the Hindu majority and and convinced the Hindu majority on three various fronts. So we will see that Modi narrative fascism is now a genuine ideology in India, tested empirically. It gives results. It is powered by the chemistry of five key factors in set pattern. The triumph of Sangh Parvar in two consecutive elections had replaced conventional nationalism. The religious connotation of Hindutva has replaced the tolerant Hinduism. The upper class Brahmanism had collapsed Nehruvian socialism and pseudo-secularism, and also defeated Nehru-Gandhi combination of the tolerance. The scientific language to consolidate fascism has given the Hindutva acceptability among the middle class in India. The religious model of an economy based on goddess worship, Lakshmi, is new position of the Indian upper class. The Bande Matram has been now worshipped as God, and this is a dangerous religion phenomena. They say Kashmir is a crown of our Lakshmi, so we will go up to any extent. And it has been said by Amit Shah, the interior minister, when they scrapped the Article 35A and 370 in the parliament. So now, how dangerous it is for the entire security of the region. It carries the other dimensions. Now she is in tussle with her neighbors and also with the China, and we have recently seen the various skirmishes, and same is happening with the Nepal and also with Maldives early. And Pakistan was already, it is in the radar of the antagonism. So we think that the scholars shall focus. It is my humble submission to great scholars, particularly of the international relations and the media, to focus the what is the difference, what is the advanced model of the Hindutva, which I name it the Moditva or Modiism, and how we will develop an international narrative to counter it. It will be a very, my point is this, that this narrative should be developed and it needs more academic and research work in multi fields to tackle this menace in our region. So when we say that the globalization is an important phenomena to strengthen the economy of any nation, Hindutva or the Moditva has developed its own model, which is different from what is the existing and the conventional thinking in this area. So she interrelated the various things within the state, and same she is propagating internationally. So my humble submission would be that the scholars shall focus in this context and develop some consensus that how we can bring this phenomena at international radar and how it can be tackled. And I don't want to get more than time. I have made my point. Thank you. Thank you, madam. Assalamu alaikum.
Very much, Walid Sahab. I was just about to do my duty of sending you a time reminder, but thank you so much for sticking to the time. Our last speaker for today is Mr. Micheal Kugelman. Micheal Kugelman is a name which is very familiar to the South Asianists and those who are working on Asia by and large. Micheal is at present the Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C., where he is looking at the research, programming, and publications on the areas concerned. His main speciality is Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and US relations, bilateral as well as regional. He has written extensively in foreign policy and does monthly commentaries, is also for War on the Rocks. He has also contributed regular pieces to the Wall Street Journal and eminent US-based media, print and electronic media sources. Micheal would be joining us via video, which has been recorded earlier by the IICR. He was not able to join us in person. Kindly bear with us for a few minutes, and Micheal's recorded presentation looks at the topic of ultra-nationalism from a different lens, that is the strange, dangerous evolution of nationalism. So my request to the IIC technical team to kindly play the video of Mr. Micheal Kugelman. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this very important conference. I look forward to sharing my views, and I am very sorry that I could not be there in real time, but I appreciate the organizers' kind offer to let me articulate my thoughts here in advance. And for those that may have questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can easily get my contact information by Googling my name. So my main concern here relates to what I would describe as the evolution, or some might say devolution, of the way in which nationalism is conceived and practiced. Nationalism, in my view, has morphed from being something positive, something admirable, to becoming a catch-all term for all that is ugly about the world today: divisiveness, exclusionism, racism, xenophobia, and authoritarianism as well. There was a time, some centuries and then some decades ago as well, when nationalism appeared to be an intoxicatingly hopeful force for good. It was about bringing people together around common shared goals that oftentimes revolved around aspirations for independence and nationhood. It attracted mass support from the grassroots up. It was also, nationalism was also an ideal couched in the principles, the ideals of the Enlightenment, revolved around freedom, rights, and overthrowing tyranny. Nationalism overthrew repressive monarchies. It formed new nations, or led to the formation of new nations. And certainly there were many decades ago, hundreds of years ago, that did not like nationalism, and they found it dangerous, and they found it threatening. But these were the oppressors, the ossified dynastic leaders that feared the loss of their privileges, their powers, and their lives. But, you know, years and years ago, the masses reveled in nationalism, and it helped fuel freedom campaigns and independence movements as well. Now, if you fast forward to the present day, or the current era, I should say, of the last half decade or perhaps more. And what has nationalism become now? I would argue that it has become something that simply does not have a very good connotation. It has become something that is utterly unrecognizable from its former form, from its former self. Nationalism has become something that has oftentimes been appropriated by strongmen, by authoritarian leaders, or by leaders with authoritarian tendencies. It has been appropriated by them to justify rhetoric and policies that do not bring people together, but rather drive them apart through the telegraphing of divisive rhetoric and exclusionary policies. So it seems that these days no longer is nationalism a bottom-up democratizing affair, but instead it appears to have become in so many cases a top-down dictatorial imposed affair. And we all know the practitioners of this new brand of nationalism. They lead governments of many top and middle powers: the US, India, the Philippines, Brazil, Hungary, a number of other places as well. And these leaders, they say many different things, and the contexts are always very different. But I think that their main message, or one of the main messages, even if implied, not explicitly articulated, is that you are not a true citizen of your country, that you are not a legitimate citizen of your country, not truly a part of your nation, unless you agree with the ideologies and the views of these governments, which, again, tend to be very divisive, toxic, exclusionary, and so on. And I think that maybe the term anti-national, which we hear coming out of India very frequently these days, best encapsulates this new normal, what I've been trying to say. And the same, quite frankly, with the term traitor in Pakistan. The idea is that if you go against the grain, if you criticize the government harshly, if you express solidarity with marginalized communities, if you refuse to buy in, or if you refuse to buy what the government wants you to buy, then you are not worthy of the nation that birthed and raised you. I think it's very troubling. I really do. And these supposedly nationalistic governments are supported and enabled by many people, by many groups that think of themselves as nationalists and oftentimes identify themselves as nationalists, but are in fact very frequently bigots and nothing else. These are people with views that previously would have been considered fringe, but have now been elevated to the mainstream. And this change, I think, is particularly striking in many of the liberal Western democracies. I grew up as a kid in France and Belgium, and then I returned to Paris to study, all during a period in the late 1980s and then into the 1990s. And back at that time, there was a politician named Jean-Marie Le Pen who made some headlines for the really nasty and racist things that he said. He said he opposed any types of immigration, that no Muslims should be in France, and that most infamously, gas chambers in concentration camps during the Holocaust amounted to a, quote, detail of history. But back then, people in France and more broadly in Europe and the world too, they knew who he was. They knew who John Le Pen was. He was a politician who ran a far-right political party called the National Front. He gained a parliamentary seat. He made a lot of noise. He said a lot of ugly things. But he didn't really do much else. He contested a variety of presidential elections, but he never got more than a tiny share of the votes, with the exception of 2002, when he got enough votes to get to the second round of voting. But after hundreds of thousands of French citizens took to the streets to protest his ugly views, he was trounced in the final round of voting. So in effect, you had large numbers of the public, a critical mass of people rejecting his views and rejecting what he stood for. And so essentially, Jean-Marie Le Pen and his party, his political party, the National Front, were basically sideshows. They were fringe. They were far from the mainstream. And it was a similar story in the US back then. When I was in high school and in college, there were some fringe political characters that would pop up every now and then. people like David Duke, who had ties to the Ku Klux Klan. And these types of people were viewed by most Americans, by a majority of Americans, as dangerous, discredited politicians with views far outside the mainstream that did not deserve to be occupying central positions in politics. And so they had their followers, but there was a small number, and they were not given much credibility or legitimacy by the public, by the country on the whole. But then things changed. The fringe went mainstream. There have been, I mean, just looking at, we all know what's been happening over the last 2 years in the US. There have been senior officials in the White House, including President Trump himself, that have articulated or endorsed some of the most nasty retrograde views. And neo-Nazi groups have staged marches around the US, emboldened by a president who has never really condemned them for what they say and what they do. And meanwhile, in Europe, nativist politicians like Geert Wilders, who has said the nastiest things about Muslims, these types of people have unfortunately become big names and started to play prominent roles in politics. So in effect, as I said before, the fringe has gone mainstream, providing the ideological strength for today's toxic nationalism, or as this seminar is describing it, ultra-nationalism. So this is really a remarkable turnaround, this evolution from nationalism seen as a good thing to this sense of nationalism being synonymous with all of the bad things happening in the world, the toxicity and the racism and the xenophobia and all that. And I think that this ugly evolution, or devolution is perhaps a better term, it raises two logical questions. One is, what explains this turnaround? And two, what does it mean for the world? So in terms of the first question, why has this shift in terms of how nationalism viewed and perceived plays out? Why has it taken place? Clearly, there are many reasons. And it would take an entire day of deliberations to go over all the reasons. But I think one key reason, especially in the West, is that it reflects a reaction to the forces unleashed by globalization. And we all know what globalization is. I don't need to define it. It's something that began in the 80s, but especially in the 1990s after the fall of the Cold War, in which you started to have many things happening that weren't happening earlier, and we'll get to that in a second. But today's nationalism is part of a backlash against the liberalization and the pluralism and the other values that sprung from the democratic principles that characterized previous iterations of nationalism. So globalization set in some decades ago. It produced a series of effects, including more immigration, more trade, more internationalization, more borders that were increasingly perceived to be irrelevant or immaterial. And in time, there were large numbers of people that came to resent these effects. And they had political champions that started to take up their cause to protest against these perceived negative impacts of globalization. And this had ripple effects across the world, for sure. Now, to be sure, this is not to say that uglier forms of nationalism did not exist earlier on in time, for sure. And I would argue that there are a number of countries, including India and Pakistan, where toxic nationalism has long been propagated by powerful political entities over time. But I do think that the global backlash to globalization and the nativist exclusionary movements that it has spawned, that this is a key factor here, particularly when talking in the broader global context that I have about why we've seen this toxic nationalism come to play out in so many parts around the world, including parts of the world where in previous decades you didn't see it happening, you didn't see it playing out as much. So finally, what does today's ultra-nationalism, toxic nationalism, what does it mean for the world? Well, I mean, to state the obvious, it certainly presents threats to the precepts of tolerance and pluralism and diversity that had come to take shape in so many different parts of the world. And these principles have been under assault for some time now. And I would argue that even if we reach a point in time where today's ultra-nationalist leaders are shown the door through elections, whatever the case may be, it will take a long time for us all to recover from what's been happening in recent years. I mean, for example, you have forces of ultra-nationalism in the United States that will be embittered, that President Trump has lost the election, even if he hasn't yet admitted he's lost the election. He and his supporters will eventually have to acknowledge that he's lost the election. And they likely, Trump's far-right, hardline supporters, they're not going to stop propagating the ugly messages that they've been propagating over the last few years, and did so much because they felt emboldened by a president who never condemned what they were doing for the most part. And I think this gets to another impact of this ultra-nationalism. It has made the world so much more divided. Ultra-nationalists, who generally speaking represent the far right politically, they have emboldened the far left, which has brought out groups like Antifa in the US and other far left progressive forces that take their own type of tough lines and sometimes use violence. And it's the centrists, the moderates, so to speak, who try to bridge gaps. They tend to get crowded out in this type of environment. Now you look at a leader like Joe Biden, who was just elected, and one of his main goals, so he claims, is to try to bridge that gap and to bridge these divides. He's trying to push back against this ultra-nationalism that's divided the US and so many other countries as well. That'll be a very difficult goal for him to pursue, given how deeply divided the US is and given how impacted democratic institutions have become. And then finally, talking about impacts, global impacts of ultranationalism, stability certainly is one as well. Now, I mean, today's ultranationalist leaders have not started wars, but they and their governments have come out with laws, policies, and they've pushed out rhetoric that is divisive and hateful. And this has sharpened communal, ethnic, racial, and sectarian tensions, depending on what country you're talking about. And so naturally, the risk of social unrest and violence has been heightened. But I'd argue that there are also some implications for regional and global stability. The Modi government's Hindu nationalism animates its virulently anti-Pakistan rhetoric, as well as its actions in Kashmir, which of course stoke deeper tensions between an always fraught India-Pakistan relationship, one that of course experienced a brief military conflict in February of last year. And consider as well China's wolf warrior diplomacy, which is the name that Beijing itself gives to its increasingly assertive and, yes, nationalistic policies meant to pursue its interests, including territorial claims around Asia. Now, wolf warrior diplomacy has led to heightened tensions in the South China Sea and, of course, in Ladakh, and it has sharpened US-China rivalry, which is itself impelled by ultranationalist considerations, such as President Trump's nativist rhetoric about China stealing US jobs and being responsible for the coronavirus pandemic hitting the US. So in all these strands of international relations and foreign affairs these days, ultranationalism is always there, which I think is one of the great reasons why it's so great that you're holding this seminar. So to conclude, where does this leave us and where to go from here? These are important questions that I wish I could be present for to discuss in the Q&A, but I would argue here that all we can do is place our faith in institutions that continue to stand for democracy, pluralism, tolerance. These institutions, these principles have been hit hard in the US in recent years, but they do remain very much intact. And supporting these principles, I think, should be an apolitical, nonpartisan pursuit. And so long as these principles remain cherished and supported, I think that there's hope for reconciliation and recovery to get through this very difficult period, certainly in US history, but also in the history for the world as well. So with that, thank you very much for the time.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Micheal Kugelman from the Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you, Dr. Ms. Sabaslam and the IICR for playing his presentation. We now have around 20 minutes for a Q&A session. As posted on the chat forum, that kindly either post your questions, write them down, or you can ask direct questions, raise your hands, and we will take your questions one by one. In case you have a question directed, keep your questions short so that we can entertain as many questions as possible. If you have a question directed to any one particular panelist, kindly take the eminent panelist name. And again, I insist and request that kindly keep short questions and avoid too many comments. Thank you. Mr. Junaid, you have your first turn. Kindly unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thanks a lot. I am Junaid and I'm a student of IR from Namal. My question is to Dr. Nazir that we have seen that Trump and his companions like Bolton and Steve Bannon were supporting ultranationalism or populism in Europe. And there's a deep effort from both of these guys. So what will be the repercussions on ultranationalism by Biden coming to the power? And my second question is, okay, there is a very delicate balance between patriotism and ultranationalism. And with terrorism on the rise, we need, there is an internal instability in the country, instabilities in the countries. So how can a state ensure patriotism
Thank you,
and
Junaid.
not
One question.
overspilling
Thank you
into
very much.
ultranationalism?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. Salman Afridi, you go next. One question per person. Dr. Nazir Saab, kindly note the first question and respond. Mr. Salman Afridi, your question. Mr. Afridi, there's a lot of static at your end. Yes. Can you kindly type your question? Dr. Nazir Hussain Saab, I would request you to respond to Mr. Junaid's question.
In fact, Junaid's question is very preliminary, and we have to make a distinction in various terminologies like nationalism, ultranationalism, subnationalism, patriotism. These are terms which are very synonymous to each other, but there is a very delicate difference, and I think this requires a very long discussion. But for his understanding, I think he must consult some books or his teacher, or he can write an email to us and we can eloquently respond to that. But basically, patriotism and nationalism are almost the same. But patriotism is for the sake of the country, for the sake of the state. And nationalism is to promote your particular brand of ideology to the people of your country, which may not be your own. And ultranationalism is, as we discussed all in a very long discussion, 1.5 hours, that ultranationalism is more than racism, more than a particular brand of ideology of the people. Like Junaid, there are no more Boltons and no more Trumps, so they are gone. Biden definitely will be different. But I do agree with Kugelman that the supporter of Mr. Trump would continue to haunt us, the politics and the United States of America.
Thank you, Dr. Sir. For everyone's consumption, I have posted Mr. Micheal Kugelman's official email ID from the Woodrow Wilson Center. It is for everyone's purview. If anyone wants to pose a question to him, you can kindly write him down. He also runs a Twitter handle, and it's all available on the internet openly. The next turn goes to Mr. Osama Khalid. Kindly, Osama, unmute yourself and ask one question. Mr. Osama Khalid?
Hi, I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are audible.
I'm Usama Khalid. I'm Khalid from Department of IR. And my question is that we see the ultra-nationalism on the rise in the world. But what is happening in India especially, the rise of the RSS ideology and the Hindutva regime, that is quite alarming. And if we see what they are doing, they resemble what the Hitler did in the Nazi Germany. So
Do you
my
have a
question
question,
is,
Sama?
what is the role that the international community can play before this volcano erupts in India and the world sees another Holocaust?
Usama, do you have your question addressed to a particular panelist?
No, my question is to the entire
Mr.
panel. If
Waleed Sahab, kindly, if you could take up this question. Waleed Sheikh Sahab? I would request Professor Nazir Hussain and Professor Hamid Ersoy, any one of them, if you would like to take up this question.
I don't think so. Hamit is there, so I can speak.
I am here, but it's better
Okay.
for you to
Go on.
answer. Thank you.
Go on,
You
go
are
on, go
closer.
on.
No, you are closer to India and you know better the regional politics. Thank you.
So far I'm forgotten the question, but anyways.
So it was about Hitler and Modi's mimicking the tactics of what
This is
Hitler's
the new,
policies were.
in our parlance of international relation, it is called the new fascism. Or there are various manifestation of fascism, and of course Modi is following that. And it is not only Modi; it is, as I discussed in my discourse earlier, it is everywhere in a different manifestation. The world community only listens to the power to be, the countries, the people who matter. Fortunately or unfortunately, at this particular point of time of history, India matters a lot to the global politics, the global economic scene. So therefore, nobody is bothering about, as Walid Rasool has eloquently discussed about the Kashmir and the Indian Muslims, etc., etc. So this new fascism is, I think, being propagated, being implemented because of the Indian special nature of relationship with the United States of America, because through India they want to curtail and contain the Chinese growing power in Asia and beyond. So therefore, international community does not heed to these kind of things. But this is also applicable in Europe, Middle East, Africa, not Africa, but in many parts of the world. But my understanding is that it will be a transitionary period, and sooner than later it will die down, but it will take time.
Professor Hamid sir, I would request if you would like to make any comment. Dr. Waleed could not retain his space because there was some internet connectivity issue at his end. So if you would like to add your valuable comments to this question.
Well, thank you. As Brother Nazir Hussain mentioned, actually this is a popular movement in the world in general, and the nationalistic, ultra-nationalistic mimics and slogans are being used simply because of the gains and advantages that they can get when they use such populist mimics in the world in general. And this is really a great threat for the democracy proper and the human rights of the minorities in the world in general. So I would say that at the end of the day, such movements will die away, but it will cost dear to the mankind, in short. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Junaid, in response to your part of having enough space, you already posed one very clear question. Your second question was endless. And we would like to have as many people ask the question as possible. If there is any time opportunity, inshallah, we will give you another opportunity to pose your second question. I would now like to request Mr. Syed Haider Sultan to kindly unmute and ask his question. And after Mr. Haider Sultan, Ms. Sadaf Ali, please, your question is queued up. Again, please address the particular panelist between Professor Nazir Hussain and Professor Hamid Ersoy, either of the two panelists whom you would like to address. Sayyid Haider
Uh,
Sultan.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope I am clear.
Yes, you're audible.
Merhaba. My question is from Mr. Hamid sir, and the question is we are actually talking about, and it can be answered by Mr. Nazir Hussain too, because this is about Pakistan right now and the Muslim countries, which is a basic issue. So we are talking about the Hindutva policies and Hitler and everyone, but the basic problem which we are facing in the country is the problem of extremism, which is not letting us to grow in the other countries. Just like the same problem, I just want to give one example. We are not accepting Israel. I'm just giving an example. And still it can be beneficial for us, but we are just having the thinking that we cannot do it at any purpose. So why we are not just having good relations with the other countries and other blocs, so we can have a good sense of globalization, which we are talking about right now. So yeah, this is my whole question.
Professor Ersoy?
Well, thank you very much. It's a really good question. Yes, I do agree with you that we should be able to improve our relations with other neighboring countries, with other cultures, with other religions. Based on such a flexibility, probably we would have a better world. However, because of such ultra-nationalistic movements, it becomes more and more difficult for us to improve such relations, to initiate such intercultural dialogue, intra-national dialogue, intra-religious dialogue. There has been some attempts in order to improve the relations between different cultures, religions, ethnicities, and so on. And this has been the part of the conflict resolution. There are so many institutions, including yours. We have been having so many initiatives to create a better world, but unfortunately, being aware of the consequences of such good intention by certain groups of people in the world, they are trying to do best to prevent such initiatives to become successful. And that's why it becomes more and more difficult every day that to continue to keep on having such activities, unfortunately. I have been part of many initiatives as such, but all of them have failed somehow, and now they are all paused, simply because of the new process which is initiated together with the 9/11 events. And we all know that were done intentionally in order to stop such activities. I mean, I don't personally believe that the 9/11 events took place in a natural way. It's done on purpose and by certain groups, I would say. That's why it's difficult, unfortunately. I'm not that optimistic that we may have a better world despite the works and activities of such ultranationalistic movements, which becomes more and more popular in every part of the world, unfortunately. I wish one day we will have, for example, Erasmus program between the Islamic countries. I hope we will have exchange of the scholars between the Muslim countries, exchange of the experts between the institutions, organizations of the Islamic countries, as it is the case between the European Union countries. But unfortunately, we are far away from this objective for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Ms. Sadaf Ali?
Assalamu alaikum. Are you people audible?
Yes, you're audible.
My question is extreme patriotism turn people towards the ultra-nationalism, or there are some other causes? And how to curtail this extremism? Thank you.
Either of the panelists who would care to address this question? Ms. Sadaf, do you have any one person in mind?
Your journal, anybody could answer this because this is for the journal. We cannot get too specific.
Okay. The last question for the session, kindly bear with me, is from Mr. Osama Rauf. Mr. Osama Rauf, kindly unmute your mic and ask the question. This is the last question of the session. Mr. Osama Rauf?
Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So my question is target was Dr. Nazir Hussain, and I wanted to ask is that in religious ideologies are considered to be the part of nationalistic ideology at the national level, while in other countries, as it is explained by the panelist, that it is considered to be the part of ultra-nationalism. And what I wanted actually to ask is that uh, 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 under this segregation, don't you think that it makes the whole process confusing if by a country or a set of countries? Hello?
Um, okay, I will quickly
Hello?
summarize this question. Your mic is, there's a lot of static at your end, Mr. Osama. Professor Nazir Hussain, kindly, if you can, the question asked was about, in some countries, religious ideology is considered to be part of nationalism, while in other countries, it is considered to be part of ultra-nationalism. Is this segregation relative to the countries being observed? And if it is not, doesn't it make the whole process confusing? Professor Nazir Hussain,
No, there is.
and
There
sorry,
is
this question is from Professor Hamid, from Professor Nazir Hussain. And the last question is from Professor Hamid by Ms. Iram Gul. How the leadership can come into existence as recent power centers in countries such as Pakistan don't let common man or even scholar to pose questions. Issues dangerous to integrity and ideology or their relationships with the world powers above the state and trust. This is the last question addressed to Professor Hamid. Sir Nazir Hussain, kindly respond to the first query, and then Professor Hamid Ersoy.
Thank you, Dr. Salma. In fact, the entire debate which Ms. Sabah has started on this very forum, we have been dealing with this. I told you earlier, I discussed this in my initial discourse, that there are many manifestations of ultra-nationalism, whether that is ideology, whether that is religion, whether it is racism, whether it's creed, there's a caste, there's a whole history. But today, the ultra-nationalism is being equated with populism, and populism is to win over the feelings and the hearts and minds of the people for the sake of your political perpetuation, and use it as an agenda for your country to superimpose this on your neighbors, on others within your region or outside your region. Like the concept of globalization started from the United States of America, landed in many parts of the world. Now nobody's talking about globalism anymore. It's all are so much concerned with populism and ultra populism. And if you take the example of many countries, like even Pakistan, we have been put to the wall by international and regional actors because of many issues and many reasons. Our region, especially our country, had been used by the great powers. I don't want to name the great powers to go for curtailing and controlling one's particular state or one particular country. And we were unfortunately being used as pawns by even our Muslim brethren from Middle East. And then it landed up in dividing our society, totally dividing our society. And in Pakistan, unfortunately, we have been seeing the rise of religious populism. The very famous case is Mr. Khadim Hussain Rizvi, who just 2 days ago was in Rawalpindi in Islamabad. So there's a totally different manifestation of populism, religion, ideology. But the good thing is, this is my understanding, I may be wrong, right, but as a reader of international relations for the last 3 decades, that this is again a transitionary period. Sooner or later it will go away, but definitely, as my brother from Turkey, Hamit, has been saying, that we need a concentrated effort from within and effort from outside. The within effort is from the country itself, the people itself, and then the effort of the so-called, I would not say Muslim world, but the confluence of the Muslim states who have their national security interests joining together. It may be Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, Malaysia, or even Saudi Arabia. Because after going out by Mr. Trump, even Saudi Arabia is feeling a little bit uneasy because of Mr. Biden's special role and special messages to Saudi Arabia. But please try to understand there are many manifestations. We cannot talk about each and everything in 15 minutes or in 1.5 hours. It requires many discussions.
Thank you very much, Professor Nazir sir. Most grateful for your kind comments. Professor Ersoy?
Well, the question is very relevant to the subject. And unfortunately, I have to answer the question in this way. The politics game, the game of the politics, is being played in every country in the same way. And it's not different in the Western countries or in our part of the world. So the politicians will be playing the game in order to increase their own gains and to remain in the power. That's the main objective of the politicians. And this is the only motivation behind, we should understand their acts and their deeds, their activities accordingly. So I would be surprised if the questions about increasing the solidarity, improving the integrity of the society would be prevented. If that is the intention of the question, I am really surprised to hear it, because not only in any democratic country, even in any, monarchies, I don't know, I cannot just describe the degrees of the suppression of the people and the freedoms, but in every country, I would assume that the questions raised in order to increase the extent of integrity and solidarity among the nations would be allowed and freely asked, and even the answers would be freely exchanged, I would imagine. But coming to the politicians, yes, the politicians in the United States, we have been observing that, imagine, the election is over. It's so clear that Joe Biden has won the election, and Trump is coming out and say, I won the election. He tweets. So shameful, but so strange. I would be surprised to see such a exchange of tweets on internet, even for the African leaders. But it is so-called superpower, and this is the degree of their democratic understanding. So the politicians, to conclude, the politicians are the same everywhere. Their main and only motivation is to remain in power and to survive of every election. And that's why I would imagine that they could do anything to ensure this result. So we shouldn't be surprised by it. Thank you very much. But those days will be over. Very soon, those days will be over, and we will we will come back to the normal life after such populist discourses are over and fulfilling the satisfaction of certain number of people in every country. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Professor Hamid Ersoy. Your repetition far precedes you, and it is indeed very well deserved. It's such an honor to be sharing this panel with you, or the space with you, and I'm extremely grateful to my professor, Dr. Nazir Hussain Saab, for joining this panel, and to the two other speakers who are for the moment not with us, but Sheikh Walid Rasool, I think you have joined us back. Thank you for being part of this discussion. Our apologies that you could not remain with us longer for the Q&A, but I would appreciate if you can kindly post your email address. If anyone has any question from you, they can email to you or reach you through any access number, and we would be grateful to you for that. For Micheal Kugelman, his email address has been shared. I'm most grateful once again to the IICR and to the director, Dr. Sabah Aslam Sahiba, for providing me this opportunity to be a guest moderator. And without further ado, we have already nearly overstepped our time limit. Madam Sabah, I would like you to conclude this particular session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And when my mentors are here, I'm not supposed to conclude. I'm not supposed to conclude the session, but I'll be, and I am grateful to my mentors, Dr. Nazir Hussain, Ma'am Salma, and Dr. Walid Rasool Sahab, and Hamit, Mr. Hamit Soy, and Micheal Kugelman, who gave us the precious time, and they shared their valuable thoughts with us on the topic. So I'm really very thankful to you all for making this online conference a success for the participants and for our institute as well. And we have learned a lot from all your expertise, and we might develop, and we will be developing more on these topics and lines, and we will be disturbing you, and we will be getting your insight on all these things, as you are our seniors, and we need your attention on the topics, and we will be delighted to get your knowledge on that, and we will be delighted to learn more and more from you guys. So thank you so much for taking your time out and making this online conference a success. Thank you so much. And thank you all the participants who participated and who took their time from their precious schedules for us, and they joined us and they participated with their all wholehearted. Thank you so much. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Wholehearted thanks from Turkey to Pakistan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Turkey and we are one.
We are indeed.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, inshallah.
Inshallah. Inshallah. We'll get closer and closer every day, inshallah.
Inshallah.
We have no other option except this one.
Inshallah, every individual will understand it and will act accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Allah Hafiz. Ma salam.